are some really lovely passages in Isaiah, including this one. I've been dwelling on this for quite a while and reading it in different versions and looking in the concordances and the study books and really just enjoying it. And so today we're just going to go through the passage, and it's a bit like having a sermon of two halves. But it starts, doesn't it, with God exalting us to lift up our eyes and look at the heavens. And you know, I've never really taken fully in what those verses say till recently. He says, lift up your eyes and look to the heavens. Who created all these? He who brings out the starry hosts one by one and calls forth each of them by name. You see how great is our God. We've just watched a clip of creation and we marvel at it, don't we? But I think that we don't actually grasp how great our God really is. And maybe we're not capable, maybe our minds are too small and earthbound to actually fully grasp how amazingly great our God is. We just get maybe a snippet. Maybe when we're in heaven and we're different, we could fully understand how great he is. But it's something that we can choose to take time on and dwell on, isn't it? And try to understand how great he is. You see, I'd never really taken on board that he says that he brings out the starry host one by one and calls them forth by name. Well, how big is this starry host? Now, I tried to find out, and if you search it, you get so many answers, and some of it is quite scientific, and I couldn't understand some of it. So I looked for something that I thought I could, with my mind and my the amount of education I have, what can I understand? And I found a really good quote on the NASA website. And it said, there are 1 septillion known stars, observable stars in the universe. The ones that we could see or that we know of one way or another. It says 1 septillion is 1 and 24 zeros. Can you imagine that? Now this is the really big news is, because I thought, I can understand that. I can't possibly imagine that number, 1 and 24 zeros. But 1 septillion, that's sort of, I can get that. Do you know that's actually was in 2008, and since then they've discovered, they think, another, I can't remember if it was 7 or 9 universes. So actually we have no idea what that number would truly be, but that's a fact that I can understand. It's 1 septillion, 24 zeros in the observable universe. And do you know what? My God named every single one. And I had to think to myself, have I actually ever truly appreciated how great God is? You see, I thought I had, but actually, have I? Have you? Because naming means something significant, doesn't it? I just don't imagine that God's got any duplicates. I bet there's not, a Paula P and a Paula T and a Paula. I bet they've all got their own individual names because it's God, isn't it? That's what I think. And sometimes naming means that there's relationship. Because God is a God of relationships. And if you know him as a distance, a bit like those stars, you gaze at them, You gaze at them at night, but you're never really going to get any closer to them. We're not. And if that's how you view God from a distance, and you sort of come on a Sunday or you occasionally say a prayer, that's not actually God. He's a God of relationships. So he knows those stars because he named them. And then you do know you are allowed to use your imagination. God created our imaginations, and we are allowed to use them. And what I don't know, and I want to know, and it's on my list that when I get to heaven, I've got a list of questions when I get to heaven. I also know that when I get to heaven and I see Jesus, I will instantly forget them and not be bothered. But at the moment, I keep the list just in case he lets me have some of the answers. So did God call them out by name at creation? At their point of creation, were they called out by name? Or does he call them out every single night? And I did look in the commentaries and I can't find it. And nobody knows. No one had anything to say. And I thought, well, I'm really disappointed. All these learned guys and who have done far more study than me, hasn't any of them ever asked the question? Come on. But I don't know. But this passage starts with God declaring his greatness. And we know he's great. We know he's powerful. But here, he's given a whole new picture, isn't he, of his greatness. We haven't known for many generations how many stars there were. And we're the generation that's getting to see all those Hubble telescope things. And actually, we're seeing things in the sky. We had the Northern Lights over Farnsfield, didn't we, last year? We had a rainbow sky over Boulderton, which is 1.5 miles from where we live, recently. And we're the generation that the secrets of the stars are being revealed to. How great is that? So that's like just an aside, really, because I got so excited that Robin already had to go through this and you weren't going to escape it. So, but how great is our God and how great is your God? Because your picture of God will be different to mine. So do you need to just enlarge how great that picture of how great he is? Because I did with this. But then we get to verses 27 and 28, and here's Israel and Jacob complaining and moaning. And if you look back in the Old Testament, you'll find that Israel has a reputation of going their own way and then railing at God as if it's his fault, that he'd not helped. And there are cycles where they will follow God for so long and then off they go on their own way, doing it in their own strength, and it's God's fault, and then they'll repent and come back to him. And on average, those cycles were 2 generations. And they would sort of go off and then come back. And they did it again and again. But that also can be us, can't it? How many times do we go off on our own way instead of following God's way? And we have to be really careful about that, about not, because sometimes our own way can seem sensible or good, or sometimes we can persuade ourselves that it is the right way and that it's a godly way. But sometimes it's not God's way, because God's ways are higher than our thoughts, and God's ways are different to how we think. And that's really because of verse 28. Because God's pointing out here that he is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He's a God of the long view, not just right now. So often when Israel got Mardy and went off on their own, it was because God wasn't doing things fast enough or wasn't doing things how they'd expected them to do. But it's because God has the view from the creation to the ends of the earth. God has a long view. And he has that for us as individuals, and he has that for us as a church, and he has that for dozens of different reasons that sometimes he wants to take us a certain way. I remember when I was much younger as a Christian, someone once telling me, and it stuck with me, he said, it's like a conveyor belt, you see. He said, you're doing something here, and God wants you further down the belt doing something else, but you can't go yet because there's someone down there that God's waiting for them to do their bit or learn their lesson or move into their place, and there will be a ripple effect. He said, so you're waiting for them, but you just got your message about where where else or what else you're meant to do, but you've got to wait. And that's this long view, isn't it? That Israel will complain because they want things now and they want it their way. But God says, I'm the creator. I'm the everlasting God from creation to the ends of the earth. He's got a long view in mind. And that's something we also need to sometimes bear in mind, because we can feel like we're waiting a long time for answers to prayer. We can feel we're waiting for a long time for breakthrough. Or we can get frustrated with something. But God does have it in hand. And then the second part of that reading, it's like God, it's like it switches, doesn't it? And we start looking at those that are weary and the tired. And there's verses 29 to 31 say, he gives strength to the weary and increases the power of the weak. Even youths grow tired and weary, and young men stumble and fall. But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. So the world's view of the weak and the weary is often to write them off. Somebody's too weak, someone's too tired, can't pull their weight. That happens a lot in the workplaces, doesn't it? You're not pulling your weight. Sometimes it's too much weight is given for you to pull, but that's not how it will be looked at. If you're not pulling your weight, we can't keep you. And the weak and the weary are often put to one side or disregarded or left. That's the world's view. But God says to those people, they're the ones he will give strength and power. And let's look at physical tiredness. There's an example in 1 Kings chapter 19, 3-9, where Elijah, it says Elijah was afraid and ran for his life. When he came to Beersheba in Judah, he left his servant there, while he himself went on a day's journey into the wilderness. He came to a broom bush, sat down under it, and prayed that he might die. I have had enough, Lord, he said. Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors. Then he lay down under the bush and fell asleep. All at once an angel touched him and said, Get up and eat. He looked around, and there by his head was some bread baked over hot coals and a jar of water. He ate and drank and then lay down again. The angel of the Lord came back a second time and touched him and said, Get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you. So he got up and ate and drank. Strengthened by that food, he travelled for 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God. There he went into a cave and spent the night. So it's not wrong to feel tired, and tiredness comes in different ways. Tiredness came to Elijah because he'd been zealous in what he'd been doing for God. And he just grinds to a halt and sits down. And I suspect many of us have been in that place, that there's been a point where you might not have done it publicly under a broom bush, but at home you've just sat down and thought, I've had enough for now. And God says, in the Isaiah verses, he says about how he will empower and give strength to the tired and the weary. But here, through an angel, God provides food and drink and opportunities to sleep, to rest. And that's what empowers Elijah. And he is empowered because he then travels for 40 days. That's not humanly possible, is it? If you sat down and thought, I'm so tired, all I'm going to do tomorrow is eat, drink, and sleep, you wouldn't get up the next day and travel for 40 days and 40 nights. Because that's the difference, is that for Elijah, it was God who was doing the empowering, who'd seen the tiredness and seen the weakness and empowered him, not human food, drink and rest. So there's a difference. And then there's another person in the Bible who gets tired, and that's Moses. He's in Exodus 17. A few verses, starting at verse 9. Moses said to Joshua, "Choose some of our men and go out to fight the Amalekites. Tomorrow I will stand on top of the hill with the staff of God in my hands." So Joshua fought the Amalekites as Moses had ordered, and Moses, Aaron and Hur went to the top of the hill. As long as Moses held up his hands, the Israelites were winning, but whenever he lowered his hands, the Amalekites were winning. When Moses' hands grew tired, they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it. Aaron and Hur held his hands up, one on one side, one on the other, so that his hands remained steady till sunset. So Joshua overcame the Amalekite army with the sword. And I puzzled over this, because is this physical tiredness or is it spiritual tiredness? And I don't know, and perhaps it's both. Because it's true that the stance that Moses took, arms raised high, is a worship stance, isn't it? And Robin preached one time and explained about how worship goes before, that worship leads, we've got examples of where the worship leads the battle. And Moses takes a stance of worship. So maybe it's both. Physical and spiritual tiredness. But he starts to his arms start to drop. He's getting tired. Whichever type of tiredness, or whether it is both, it is still the effect is that his arms are coming down. And what does God do? Actually, God doesn't take away the job. He doesn't say to Moses, okay, have a rest, go and sit down. he doesn't do that. Instead, he stirs up Aaron and Hur, and they roll the stones so that Moses can sit down, and they take his hands. And I think that's a really beautiful picture of church, because sometimes supporting one another costs, doesn't it? Sometimes praying and checking, how are you going, is what's needed. Other times, there's a bigger cost to it. I remember, last year when on the day my dad died, and we were, all over the place, like physically as well as emotionally. We had to go off to his flat, we had to go off other places, and by the time everything settled down and we got home, my son had let himself in, and the fridge was full with a 3-course meal, and there were chocolates. Probably most importantly, there were chocolates on the side as well. And he said, I know there's too much food, but I thought you could just, he said, I made sure everything just went on a tray and in the oven, and no cooking, no preparation, and I thought you could just eat your way through it as you were. If you were really hungry, you could have 2 courses. If you weren't hungry, you could just have one little bit. And I thought, how amazing. Because that's being Aaron and Hur, isn't it? It's like, not just, I'm not saying prayer isn't really important. Prayer is hugely important for one another. But that's that going into the situation and physically helping. And I thought, that's really, maybe, maybe I helped teach him some of that, but maybe not. Maybe he's, it's just God using him. And this is what we're seeing here, that Aaron and Hur come alongside, and they don't just say, there, Moses. Keep that, the longer you keep your hands up, the quicker it'll be over. They take his hands and they support him. And if you think about it, how long before they would have been tired? Probably not that long. And no, they don't even get much credit for it, do they? Nobody comes and rolls a stone for them. And, they're not mentioned anywhere else. And when we talk about the story, we talk about Moses holding his hands up for the Amalekites to win. We don't very often say, and did you see what Aaron and Hur did? We just don't. So they didn't get a lot of credit. And so here's a depiction of worship, but here also is church family getting in there and supporting, even though there's a cost to Aaron and Hur. And one last type of weariness. In Galatians chapter 6, you'll know this verse really well. Chapter 6, verse 9. Let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. Therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all people, especially to those who belong to the family of believers. And you can get tired of doing good. You can get tired of serving. In fact, you must be able to get tired of doing good, else it wouldn't be in there, would it? You can think, oh, not today. I'm not going over to so-and-so today because I just don't have, anything to help them with, or I don't want to pick up any jobs. You can get weary of doing good. But this is partly a warning with this one, isn't it? It says, don't stop doing good. Why? Because there's reward if you keep on. And Robin also taught us about reward, that reward is about that having more of Jesus. In a nutshell, because I'm not redoing his sermon, but have you ever noticed that it says especially to believers? And I've puzzled about that because I think in the past at times I've thought focus on unbelievers because, you know, we want them to get saved. We want them to become Christians or to come to church. But actually it says especially the believers. And maybe it's because there are lots of verses in the Bible where God calls us family. So we all come from really different backgrounds, and some of us would never have met each other except in here. We wouldn't have come across each other because we don't actually have the same hobbies, and we didn't go to the same colleges or unis, and actually many of us don't even live in the same town. So he calls us here and makes us family. So maybe God's saying, look after your family. But also maybe God's saying, there's another verse, isn't there, where God says that the world sees how much we love one another. And maybe that's it, that those that are not in this family, if they see the way that we do good to one another and love one another, maybe that is what draws them in. So, back to Isaiah. In the new NIV, it now says, but those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. But I suspect that most of us have got the version that says those who wait. And I said to Robin, why have they changed wait for hope? And he said, well, people don't like waiting, do they now? You know, waiting's got negative connotations. Oh, hasn't it happened yet? But I looked up what the word wait originally meant. And it says that it means staying in that place of anticipation, steadfastly expecting God's mercy, salvation, or rescue, and not taking things into your own hands. And so, in a way, wait and hope neither of them quite reflect that state, do they? It's being in that place where you just know God will do something. And maybe you don't know what he will do, but he will do something. And that's what you're waiting for. And one of the commentaries says, those waiting are those prepared to be lifted up and carried aloft by the Spirit of God in his time and in his way. And I thought, oh, I like that. How do you feel about that? About waiting and being prepared to be lifted up and carried aloft by the Spirit of God in his time and in his way. The first thing that came to my mind was that speaks of adventure. Like Philip. You remember Philip in Acts 8? He gets swept up. So I'm not going to read it because of time, but I went and looked that up. And when he's swept up, it says he is deposited to preach the gospel. I thought, oh, that sounds like adventure. Would you be up for an adventure with God? And last verse says about soaring on wings like eagles. And we've all watched clips about eagles. And when they soar, it's effortless, isn't it? They get on the thermals and they just can be up there for forever with very little effort. I'd like to soar, and I have soared with God at times before, but I'd like to soar with God again. So if you're feeling that tiredness, whether it's spiritual or physical, or it's a giving up of the things that God's called you to do, those verses about empowering and strength and soaring on wings like eagles are for you this morning and for me this morning. And if that was you, please don't go away without letting someone pray for you. And you could come and ask me and Robin, or ask someone that you trust and know well. And if you need to pick up one of the little challenges today, to be more like Aaron and her, or that relationship, or you just need to take half an hour out and actually dwell on how great our God is, and Google them septillion stars, or write out a 1 with 24 noughts and see how much paper you need, then God's waiting actually for you to do that. Because as you move towards him, he will move towards you.